She stood beneath the stone archway, framed by dying sunlight and ivy-covered walls, her white dress catching the last blush of the day like an open wound. The silk didn't drape over her. It clung to her body as if unwilling to let go, as if stitched into her skin. I raised my camera and clicked the shutter. The sound cracked the air like a branch snapping underfoot in a dead forest. Her gaze didn't falter. She looked straight into the lens, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I'd photographed dozens of weddings, hundreds. Backyard vows, cathedral ceremonies, beachfront rituals, all of it. I knew when to capture the trembling fingers tying a bow, when to aim for the teardrop clinging to a mother's cheek. I was good at this, detached, professional, invisible. But something about her made it impossible to hide behind the camera. Every time I looked through the lens, I felt exposed, seen, undressed. She didn't smile. Her mouth remained in that unreadable half curve. Not happiness, not serenity, not nerves, just quiet command. The kind of expression you'd expect from someone watching their house burn down while calmly sipping tea. Her eyes shimmered, not with joy, but with something deeper, older, like she'd lived this scene 1,000 times and already knew how it ended. The groom was waiting at the altar, fiddling with his cufflinks, surrounded by carefully positioned floral arches and guests shifting in their seats. He looked eager, fragile, like a boy wearing his father's suit. But her attention never strayed to him. She stood motionless, her bouquet dangling loosely at her side, petals bruising against her wrist. Her head turned just slightly toward me. My lens caught her at that exact moment, and the photograph that resulted made my stomach twist. It wasn't a bridal portrait. It was a warning. I told myself I was imagining things, projecting. It had been a long season. Back-to-back bookings, sleepless edits, endless smiles. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was just reading too much into a look. But something about her presence vibrated beneath my skin like the tremor before an earthquake. It wasn't that she was beautiful, though she was. It was that she seemed to know exactly what I would do before I did it, as though I had stepped into a play where she'd already memorized my lines. When I followed her into the dressing room for solo shots, the air changed. The bridesmaids were gone, the mirror lights dimmed, the scent of perfume lingering in the velvet corners of the room. She stood at the vanity, adjusting the lace at her neckline, her collarbone catching the light like polished marble. She didn't turn to me. She just reached down and lifted her hem, slowly, revealing the pale length of her thigh. I raised the camera again, almost on instinct. My finger hovered over the shutter. Then I clicked. Her garter was deep red, not blush or pastel or bridal ivory, blood red, the kind of red that belongs in murder scenes or mythology. I stared too long. She lowered the hem wordlessly, smoothed the fabric, and turned to face me. Her eyes met mine without apology. She looked like a woman walking calmly through a war zone, and I, idiotically, was still trying to find the map. I fled the room under the pretense of needing different lenses. My hand shook as I rearranged my gear. My chest felt tight, too full of something I couldn't name. I had taken pictures of women all my adult life, brides, dancers, actresses, lovers, and never, not once, had I felt this kind of heat curling under my ribs. It wasn't sexual, not entirely. It was elemental, a pull like gravity reversed. The ceremony began. The music swelled. The guests rose. She appeared in the doorway, glowing not with innocence or joy, but with something dangerous. I took the obligatory photos, her slow walk, his nervous smile, the exchanged glances. But the lens kept finding her hands, her shoulders, the subtle press of her spine against the bodice of her dress. Each frame felt voyeuristic, forbidden, and she knew. She always knew. I watched her say the vows with perfect enunciation. She didn't tremble, didn't tear up. Her mouth formed the words, but her eyes stayed somewhere else, somewhere just past the altar, past the crowd, past even me, like she was speaking to something none of us could see. And when the kiss came, I clicked the shutter again, even though my stomach turned. Later, during the reception, I stood apart, camera slung around my neck, pretending to check light levels. She floated through the crowd like smoke, dancing, laughing, sipping champagne. But every so often, she would turn toward me, and I would find her watching. Not smiling, just watching. At one point, I caught her outside alone, smoking under the string lights. I raised my camera. She exhaled slowly, the smoke twisting like silk in the night air, and I captured it. One perfect frame. Her lips slightly parted, her eyes half-lidded, the cigarette a glowing ember between two fingers. She looked like a crime scene in soft focus. I knew I wouldn't delete that photo. Not ever. By the time I left, my skin felt too tight. I drove home in silence, windows down, trying to exhale whatever spell she'd wrapped around me. But it lingered. I saw her face every time I blinked. I felt the heat of her gaze in my palms. And later that night, when I downloaded the images and scrolled through the set, I paused on the first shot, the one under the arch, where she stared into the lens like she was carving something into me. I zoomed in. Her eyes were unreadable, but the message was clear. She had chosen me, not for a photo, not for a memory, for something else, something I hadn't agreed to, something I didn't yet understand. And the worst part was, I didn't feel afraid. I felt seen, I felt claimed, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. And I knew this was just the beginning. The reception blurred around the edges, a haze of clinking glasses, forced laughter, and the endless loop of overplayed love songs. I kept moving, as I always did, weaving through the guests like a shadow with a lens, capturing the expected, the first dance, the cake cutting, the tipsy toasts. My body was on autopilot, but my thoughts remained fixed on her. She moved through the room with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to pretend. She didn't perform for the camera the way most brides did. There was no effort, no artifice, just presence, controlled and calculated. It was nearing midnight when she found me. I had stepped away, back into the hallway outside the banquet hall, under the excuse of needing to check memory cards. My hands were cold despite the warmth in the building, and I was leaning against the wall, trying to still my pulse when she appeared. She didn't speak, she didn't ask, she simply placed a hand lightly on my shoulder and gestured, subtle and precise, toward the staircase that led up into the older, unused part of the venue. I followed. I shouldn't have, but I did. The second floor was quiet, thick with the scent of old wood and dried lavender. It used to be part of the rectory, someone had told me earlier, a series of small rooms and storage spaces, unused since the building had been converted into an event space. The hallway lights flickered, casting long shadows. She led me into a room at the far end and closed the door behind us. It was dim, the only illumination coming from a narrow window where moonlight spilled in, catching the dust in soft spirals. The room felt like it had been untouched for years. A worn armchair in the corner, a cracked mirror leaning against the wall, and a bed, small, covered in a faded quilt that looked like it had once known warmth. She stepped forward and slowly began removing the pins from her hair. One by one, they dropped to the wooden floor with tiny clicks, like countdowns. Her hair fell in waves over her shoulders, framing her face in loose curls. Then she turned her back to me and unhooked the buttons of her dress, slipping the straps off her shoulders with the same fluidity as water pouring from a glass. The dress slid down her body and pooled at her feet. No hesitation, no theatrics. She stepped out of it, revealing pale skin and red lingerie. Elegant, expensive, unapologetic. I stood frozen, heart hammering against my ribs, fingers twitching at my sides. She walked to the window, bathed in silver light, and stood there, barefoot and silent, like a ghost dressed for seduction. I lifted my camera, not thinking, only reacting. My hands moved as if disconnected from thought. I took a photo, then another. The click of the shutter sounded indecent in the stillness. She didn't pose. She didn't need to. Every line of her body was poetry written in tension and release. Her back arched slightly as she leaned against the windowsill, her legs elongated by the way she shifted her weight from heel to toe. I moved closer, drawn by gravity or madness. I couldn't tell. I circled her, letting the lens find her from every angle. Her collarbone, the curve of her waist, the swell of her hip where the garter hugged her thigh. Her hands rested loosely on the edge of the windowsill, fingers splayed, nails painted the same deep red as her lips. She turned her face toward me, slowly, and my breath caught. Her eyes weren't blank or soft. They were sharp, alert, almost daring. I didn't ask why she brought me here. I didn't ask what this meant. I only captured, frame after frame, her reaching for her own neck, tilting her chin upward, stepping forward, closer. My camera recorded everything, but my memory was fuller than the pixels. I would remember the way the moonlight painted her skin, the way the old floor creaked under her slow steps, the sound of her breathing changing when I stopped photographing and simply stared. She crossed the space between us, and her fingers brushed against the camera, pushing it gently down. My hands fell limp at my sides. My mouth was dry. She stepped closer until there was no space between us, only heat and breath and that humming electricity that had been building all day. She guided my hand to her waist, the lace of her lingerie catching against my palm. Her skin was warm, and I could feel the flutter of her pulse. My other hand, still holding the camera, dropped to the floor with a soft thud. She leaned in, her lips hovering near my ear, and for a moment I thought I could hear words, something low, something in a language I didn't recognize, or maybe just imagined. Then her hands found mine again, and she brought them to her hips, pressing them there as if telling me to hold her, to take her in, to understand. I didn't kiss her. Not yet. I only looked. She was art in motion, a sculpture coming to life, a story told through flesh and stillness. My eyes traced her lines with reverence, confusion, need. Her fingers slid beneath the straps of her bra, slipping them off her shoulders, letting the garment fall without ceremony. Her breasts were full, natural, perfect in a way that felt unfair. My gaze dropped, caught on the place where her skin met silk, where shadow turned to heat. I felt dizzy, overwhelmed. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I reached out, fingertips skimming her ribs, her stomach, the edge of the red lace. She closed her eyes, leaned into my touch, and for a brief moment, I forgot we were anywhere real. The room dissolved, the world evaporated, and all that remained was the tremble in her breath and the quiet thud of my heart against hers. She stepped back then, just a little, her hands trailing down my arms as if reluctantly letting go. She walked to the armchair and sat, legs parted just enough to make my stomach tighten. Her expression had changed, no longer challenging, but open, inviting, expectant. I raised the camera again, but when I pressed the shutter, Nothing happened. A dead click. Then another. The screen flashed red. Memory card error. My fingers scrambled to reset, to fix, to recover, but nothing worked. The camera, so loyal and precise until now, refused to capture another image. She didn't react. She sat still, watching me fumble, her body still bathed in that impossible light. Then she smiled, small, knowing, almost cruel. She stood again, slowly gathering her dress from the floor, not bothering with the lingerie, not covering herself. She walked past me, her fingers grazing mine as she passed, and opened the door. I stood there alone, breathless, the useless camera dangling from my hand, the memory of her etched into my skin more vividly than any photo could ever hope to hold. The room felt colder after she left. I stayed there for a long time, staring out the window where she had stood, watching the moon slide behind a cloud. Later, when I checked the files, the last dozen images were gone, erased, as if she had never been there. The next morning, I woke up with the distinct sensation of having dreamed too vividly, the kind of dream that leaves residue on your skin, that clings to your bones long after consciousness returns. My sheets were twisted around my legs, damp with sweat, and the light in my apartment felt too sharp, too clean, as if it were trying to erase what had happened the night before. But there was no erasing it. My body still held the echo of her, the feel of her skin, the weight of her gaze, the press of her presence. It lingered like smoke on fabric. I didn't shower. I didn't eat. I went straight to my computer, still wearing yesterday's shirt, camera bag slung over my shoulder, heart hammering like I was about to commit a crime. I told myself I needed to get ahead on edits, to start processing the photos for the couple, to be professional. But the truth pulsed behind every thought. I needed to see her again, in still frames, frozen, safe. I transferred the files. Thousands of images scrolled across the screen in that familiar flood of thumbnails. Guests laughing, flower girls twirling, the groom wiping his brow. I clicked through them methodically at first, organizing them into folders, rating them by composition and lighting, doing what I always did. My hands were steady, but my stomach twisted tighter with each photo I passed. I was waiting for her, for the ones I knew I had taken, for the ones from that upstairs room. They weren't there. I paused, scrolling back, checked the metadata, checked the timestamps. The gap was obvious. A full hour with no images. Nothing between 10:42 p.m. and 11:39 p.m. The files jumped abruptly from a blurry group dance floor shot to a wide frame of the venue's empty parking lot. The space where she should have existed, her undressing, her silhouette in the moonlight, the shot of her curled in the armchair, the one I'd taken right before the camera failed, all of it was gone. My hands began to tremble. I opened the camera itself. The SD card still showed the correct number of files, but when I tried to recover the missing ones, the system flashed a message I'd never seen before: corrupted sector, unreadable. I ran a recovery program. Nothing. I tried again with a backup utility. Still nothing. It was like that hour had never happened, like the camera had swallowed it whole. But I remembered every second, the weight of her body in the light, the heat of her breath on my neck, the way she had looked at me when I couldn't make the shutter click, the silent way she had left the room, leaving behind nothing but air and the racing of my heart. I searched every folder manually, every cache, every temporary file, even my autosaves. But the images weren't there. They weren't hiding. They were gone. I sat back, staring at the screen, the soft hum of the hard drive filling the silence. I didn't know what unnerved me more, that the photos had vanished, or that I had started to question whether I had ever taken them at all. But I knew I had. I could still feel the camera in my hand, the texture of the leather grip slick with sweat, the faint buzz in my fingers each time I clicked the shutter. I could still see the red lace against her skin. I could still smell the dust and lavender of that abandoned room. She had been there. I had seen her, touched her, shot her, and now she was gone. I opened my messages, hoping, dreading that she had sent me something. A note, a thank you, a clue, but there was nothing. No missed calls, no texts, no emails, just silence. I checked her name in the client file, expecting at least a surname, a point of contact, something to prove she was real. But the contract was signed by the groom. She wasn't listed anywhere. No phone number, no email, no signature. Just a line that read, Bride, TBD. I looked up the groom's profile on social media. His feed was already filled with post-wedding content, photos from guests, shots of the cake, a few blurry images of the two of them laughing near the bar. But in every tagged photo, she was turned away, her face obscured by a veil, a raised arm, a trick of light. It was as if she was allergic to being captured. And the strangest part? She hadn't posted a single image herself. Her account, which I had found weeks before when building the event mood board, was now gone, deleted, not private, not inactive, gone. I opened my private folder, the one I never used for clients, the one that housed the photos I couldn't show, the moments that weren't meant for others. I half hoped I'd find one of her there, some subconscious impulse having saved a fragment without my realizing. But the folder was untouched. No new images, no hidden proof, just ghosts of old lovers, strangers whose names I barely remembered, staring back at me with open mouths and shutter-burned eyes. I sat still for a long time. The light shifted in my apartment. Outside, the world moved on. I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the blank gap in the timeline, the hole where her images should have lived. The silence around me felt unnatural, like sound had been sucked from the room. My skin itched. My spine ached. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, not typing, just waiting for a reason. I thought about that final look, the way she had touched the edge of my hand as she passed me, the way her eyes had held mine without blinking, like she knew what was coming, like she had chosen to be erased. I don't know how she did it. I don't know if it was a glitch, a trick, a deliberate act, but I knew one thing with certainty. She didn't want to be remembered. Not through pixels, not through prints, not through anything I could frame. And yet, she lived inside me now, more vivid than any photo, more haunting than any negative. I had lost the files, but I hadn't lost her. The first time she came to my apartment, it was like watching a dream step into daylight. There was no knock, no text ahead of time, no footsteps in the hall to prepare me, just the sound of my door clicking open and the hush of her presence filling the space. I looked up from my desk, and there she was, standing in the doorway, her coat still on, the collar turned up like she had walked through a storm that hadn't touched anyone else but her. Her face was unreadable, carved in stillness, and I didn't ask why she was there. I didn't ask how she knew where I lived. I just stood and let her in. She moved through the apartment like she had always belonged to it, her fingers brushing along the back of my couch, her gaze sweeping the shelves and walls, stopping briefly on a framed print of an old photo I'd taken in college. I watched her as if from a distance, though she was only a few feet away. My chest ached in a strange, quiet way, the kind of ache that comes when something impossible is happening and you don't know if you're terrified or grateful. She shrugged off her coat and let it fall to the floor. Beneath it, she wore a loose black shirt and nothing else. Bare thighs, bare feet, no jewelry, no trace of the bride she had been, only skin and shadow and silence. The bedroom was dark when she led me there, lit only by the soft blue cast of the streetlight slipping through the blinds. The air felt heavier, thicker, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. I stood by the edge of the bed, unsure what to do with my hands, unsure if I was supposed to say something, do something, or simply be still and wait. She didn't hesitate. She reached for me with the confidence of someone who had done this before. Maybe not with me, maybe not in this exact space, but with the kind of authority that doesn't need confirmation. Her hands found the hem of my shirt and lifted. I raised my arms and let her peel it off. Her fingers grazed my ribs as she moved, slow and deliberate, never breaking eye contact. Her touch was not gentle, not cruel either, just deliberate, firm, grounding. She pushed me backward until I felt the mattress press against the backs of my knees. I sat, breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat, my pulse erratic, confused by the softness of the moment and the power inside it. She knelt in front of me, her palms sliding along the outside of my thighs, guiding them apart without a word. When she kissed me, it was slow and deep, not searching but claiming. Her lips moved over mine with intention, as if she were erasing everything I thought I knew about kissing and replacing it with something older, something raw. Her tongue slipped into my mouth like a secret, and I moaned into her without meaning to. My hands gripped her shoulders, then her hair, then her hips. I couldn't decide where I needed her most. I needed her everywhere. She pushed me back onto the bed and climbed over me, straddling my hips. The fabric of her shirt brushed against my chest, rough and intimate. I felt her weight settle on me, grounding me, holding me in place with a kind of effortless authority. She rocked her hips once, slow and heavy, and I gasped at the contact. I could feel the heat of her even through the thin fabric between us. Her mouth left mine and traveled downward, over my jaw, my throat, the hollow between my collarbones. She moved like she had all night to explore me, her teeth grazing, her tongue tasting, her breath warm and unrelenting. I arched into her touch without thinking, my hands clutching the sheets, the pillow, her arms, anything I could find. I wasn't guiding her. I wasn't leading. I was following, letting her map my body as if it were hers to keep. And maybe it was. She slid lower, dragging her fingers down my sides, catching the waistband of my underwear and pulling it down in one smooth motion. The cool air on my skin made me shiver, but her mouth followed quickly, replacing cold with fire. She kissed her way down my stomach, pausing just long enough to let the tension rise unbearably, and then dipped her head lower, lower still. When her mouth found me, I forgot everything. I forgot my name, my address, the ticking of the clock on the wall. I forgot the camera, the missing files, the wedding, the questions. I forgot how to breathe. She licked slowly, deliberately, her tongue moving in slow circles, her lips pressing, sucking, teasing. I moaned her name into the dark, not as a plea, but as a surrender. My legs trembled, my back arched, my fingers fisted the sheets until they burned. She didn't stop until I shattered beneath her. And even then, she didn't leave. She moved back up, her body sliding over mine, skin to skin now, her shirt somewhere on the floor, her breath warm against my face. She didn't speak. She just looked at me, her expression unreadable, and then kissed me again, softly, like punctuation, like she was closing a chapter that had only just begun. We lay there for what felt like hours. I don't know if we slept. The walls around us felt thicker than usual, like they were absorbing the silence, holding the heat of our bodies inside their memory. Her arm rested over my stomach, her leg tangled with mine. I could feel her heartbeat through the skin of her chest pressed against my side, steady, calm, as if none of this was strange, as if she belonged there. And maybe she did. The night never ended. It folded into itself, stretching in all directions, dense and full and unspoken. I didn't ask what it meant. I didn't ask what would come next. I didn't ask anything at all, because deep down, I was afraid of the answer, and more afraid that I didn't want one. It was almost dawn when I realized she hadn't left. The first time she came to me, she slipped away before sunrise, disappearing like a phantom into the blue hush of morning. But this time, I woke to the weight of her still beside me, the warmth of her thigh pressed against mine, her fingers loosely tangled in my hair. Her breath was slow and even. Her body curled around me in a shape that felt designed for my own. I didn't move. I barely blinked. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling her heartbeat echo through the mattress. The air in the room was different. Not lighter, not heavier, just final, as if something had shifted overnight, something irreversible. I knew without being told that this wasn't the beginning of anything. This was the edge of a closing door. I could feel it in the way she held me, not with desperation, but with a kind of reluctant tenderness, as though she was already gone, and this was only the shadow of goodbye. We didn't speak. We never had. But her body told the truth I wasn't ready to hear. At some point, she sat up. The sheet slipped down her back, revealing the long line of her spine, the curve of her waist, the faint imprint of my touch still visible on her skin. She moved like someone waking from a long sleep, slow and silent, almost ceremonial. She walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to let in the soft gray light. It painted her in silver, turned her into something too beautiful to be real. I watched her from the bed, my chest tight with the weight of everything unsaid. My hand itched for the camera, not because I wanted to capture her again, but because I needed to, as proof, as witness, as a way to hold on to this moment before it vanished like all the others. I reached over the edge of the mattress and pulled the camera bag toward me, fingers trembling. She turned her head slightly, not enough to look at me directly, but enough to let me know she knew what I was doing. There was no objection in her posture, no resistance, only permission, or maybe resignation. I lifted the camera, framed the shot, and pressed the shutter. The click was soft but final. The photo appeared on the screen, grainy, dim, imperfect, but hers. Her bare back against the light, the delicate tension in her shoulders, her hand resting against the window pane, her hair tousled, falling in uneven strands, her body half shadow, half glow. It was the most human she had ever looked. And in that frame, she wasn't a bride or a ghost or a fantasy. She was just a woman standing at the edge of someone else's story. She walked away from the window and returned to the bed, climbing in beside me without a word. She rested her head on my shoulder, her hand on my stomach. Her skin was cool now, as if the light had stolen some of her warmth. I kissed the top of her head, feeling the strands of her hair catch on my lips, and closed my eyes. We lay like that for a long time, neither asleep nor awake, just suspended. When I opened my eyes again, she was gone. The sheet was still warm where she had been. Her coat was no longer on the floor. The apartment was silent, the air motionless. I didn't move right away. I stared at the ceiling, then at the empty space beside me, then at the camera still resting in my lap. I picked it up, thumbed through the images. The last one was still there, the photo by the window. It hadn't been deleted. It hadn't been corrupted. It was intact, untouched, a perfect record of her final moment in my space. I transferred the image to my computer immediately, creating a private folder for it, encrypted and backed up in 3 places. I printed a version on high-quality matte paper and slid it into a black frame. I placed it on my bedside table, not as a shrine, but as a reminder that she was real, that she had been here, that I had touched her, and she had touched something deeper in me than I knew how to name. In the days that followed, I checked my door every morning. I left it unlocked the first few nights, hoping, or daring, but she never returned. Her social media remained gone. The groom's feed shifted to photos of cocktails and sunsets, and eventually to nothing at all. I received no calls, no messages, no requests for the wedding gallery. I stopped waiting, but I couldn't stop remembering. I could still feel the shape of her body pressing into mine, still taste the weight of her kiss, still hear the silence she left behind, ringing in the walls like an unfinished song. And every night, before I turned out the light, I looked at the photo, not for comfort, not for longing, but because some stories don't end. They just pause in the dark, waiting to be remembered. And she, in that photo, bare, backlit, unknowable, was no longer just a woman I had touched. She was the last image I would ever trust. It had been a week since she vanished. 7 days of waking up to silence, of checking my messages with hollow hope, of walking through my apartment like a stage set abandoned mid-performance. Her scent had faded from the sheets, but I refused to wash them. Her imprint had dissolved from the mattress, but I still lay on the edge where she used to rest. The framed photo remained beside my bed, untouched. I didn't look at it anymore. I didn't need to. It was already burned into the inside of my eyelids. She had passed through my life like a fever, brief, consuming, and unforgettable. I told no one. Then the call came. It was early, not yet dawn, and the number was unfamiliar. I answered out of instinct more than intent, voice cracked with sleep and dread. The voice on the other end was male, slow, careful, deliberate. He said her name. He said my name. Then he said the words that didn't make sense. She's gone. Gone. Not missing, not unreachable, not elusive, dead. He said it like a fact, like something fixed in stone. They found her in a bathtub, cold water, blood, silk dress hanging nearby, not the wedding one, but something even older, vintage maybe. There was a note, he said, 1 word, my name. He didn't sound surprised. He didn't sound angry either, just tired. Later that day, he arrived at my door. The groom, the man she was supposed to have married. He looked thinner than in the wedding photos, or maybe just less filled in. His edges were sharper now, his posture slightly collapsed, like he had spent too long standing under something too heavy. He didn't ask to come in. He just handed me a small black USB drive, nodded once, and walked away. I didn't call after him. I didn't ask why he had it or what it contained. I closed the door with trembling hands, locked it twice, and sat on the floor in front of my laptop. I inserted the drive and waited, the fan whirring louder than usual, the cursor spinning. Inside the folder were photographs, hundreds, maybe more, all of women. Some I recognized, others I didn't. Most of them were in the same kind of light I had used with her, soft, intimate, curated. All of them were beautiful, exposed, vulnerable, not in the way of models, but in the way of prey. I clicked through frame after frame, my skin tightening with each image. These weren't just portraits. These were confessions. They felt stolen, even if they had been given. And then I saw it. A photo I didn't take from that first night. Me standing in the dim light, camera in hand, staring at her with an expression I didn't recognize. Desire, yes, but also fear, confusion, submission. She had taken it. At some point, without my knowing, she had turned the lens on me, and it had captured more than my face. It had captured the moment I crossed whatever line she had drawn. As I scrolled further, I saw a pattern, the same locations repeated, the same beds, the same shadows, always different women, always the same end. The photos stopped eventually. The last folder was labeled Final. Inside, only one image, her, standing in front of a mirror, holding my camera, naked, smiling. Behind her, on the bed, a shape, blurred, unclear, but human. I couldn't breathe. I closed the laptop and backed away. My heart pounded so loudly I thought the neighbors might hear. I felt my skin crawling, my pulse racing, my mind tearing itself in half, trying to piece it all together. She hadn't chosen me randomly. None of them had been random. I had been the last. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the window, waiting for a shadow that never came. The silence was unbearable. Not peaceful, not restful, but surgical, precise, like a clean cut made by someone who knew exactly where to slice. The next morning, I printed the final image. I hung it beside the first. Now, every night, I sleep between them. One of who I thought she was, one of what she left behind. And every time I close my eyes, I wonder, was I the subject or the exhibit or simply the last photo she ever took?